So we thought that we'll do something completely different, because usually we show up at a talk, people expect Guns of Icarus, they expect airship, and talking about airship blowing each other up and stuff like that. So we thought that we'll do something completely different, and with this, I guess you guys also get to see just how burnt out we were while we were working on Guns of Icarus. So yeah, we are Muse. We're a studio in New York, based in New York City, and you might know us for that. Like I said, airships blowing each other out of the sky. Some people might have seen little creatures in the magical forest, foraging and whatnot. But for today, we're sharing our development process of this something completely new. Basically training a hamster how to fight and how to do kung fu fighting. And how this came about, it was really literally through burnout. For a while we were working on Guns. We've been working on it for a long while, and we were game jamming. We actually do that from time to time. So we thought that, hey, it would be cool if we take some of these fighting mechanics or brawling mechanics on console or on PC, and you can take a screen and you just kind of mash on it. That was essentially the premise. And we thought that, hey, if we can bring that to something completely different, because we were working mostly in PC, and now we're porting it to console after all this time, but we're working primarily in PC with really complicated control schemes. So we thought that, hey, if we actually do something totally different with our control scheme, what will happen? And so we thought that, hey, let's look at some of the mobile experiences in brawling and just see what that's like. And so some of the references we pulled are Zombieville. It's a classic game, still super popular, doing very well. I mean, it's a blend between shooting and brawling, right? You have a D-pad and movement. You can move around, and really every engagement is really short. You have a lot of different kinds of enemies. They get progressively harder. We thought that was really cool. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have something like Infinity Blade, which is really hardcore, really reactive, timing driven. If you make a mistake, you get severely punished for it, with a little bit of payoff where you can actually slash the screen, just swipe like crazy, frenetically. So we thought that it would be really interesting if we can take some of the reactive and timing component, but blend it with this cathartic release when you can actually just mash your screen and try to break your phone, perhaps. So one thing that we decided to do is to limit the control scheme and try to make it as simple as possible. And one thing that we decided to do is see if we can actually create a brawling experience without a D-pad, without a virtual D-pad, I mean. And as an aside, the reason why it became Hamster is totally random, by the way, but it was more like, hey, there was a lot of blood and gore. I mean, one of the games that we referenced is Fist of the North Star, right? With this Dynasty Warrior Infinity Blade, super bloody stuff. We just thought that it would be cool if we do something, different, and not as bloody all the time. And we've been working on violence and ships blowing up for all these years. Just thought it would be cool to do something different. And by the way, I mean, the game is still in development, and we actually just started showing the game, getting playtests in. So it's not like this is a post-mortem, we're telling you how successful this game is and everything that we did right. It's totally not the case. It really is more geared towards what we learned in our development process, some of the things that we encountered, and hopefully they will be useful. This is your portion. So.
What's up, guys? My name is Tim. I'm going to talk for 6 slides about the art direction. So Howard alluded to, it's a work in progress. We're still experimenting, we're still building. And one of the first things that we did in the game jam was just kind of like sketch out the ideas, because we had no idea what type of game it was going to be. And Howard came in one day and he said, I love Fist of the North Star, let's make a game like this. And we were like, well, that sounds really cool, but yeah, let's not make it as violent. Let's try to disguise it a little bit. Let's try to give it some character. So we thought we could combine the violence with kind of like a cartoony look and kind of take away from the offensive nature of the head exploding. So we started concepting during the game jam, and these are 5 different artists, and we all came up with different ideas of what we thought the main hero should be. And yeah, we just began by thinking of like cool, badass ways to represent a hamster, because hamsters are like the most least offensive possible characters we could develop. And we were working on this for quite a while, and we did more like in-depth sketches like this one, and then we realized that the screen went black. So we started designing anti-heroes, and it got super boring super fast, and we didn't connect to the character, the main character. We didn't want to play the game as this character because we'd seen it before. We'd seen it 100 times, and we just didn't have any investment. So let's take a step back and let's figure out how to invest a player's interest in the character. So we looked at characters that we thought were really badass, but we really cared about at the same time. Had a lot of power, but there was something about them. Maybe it was a weakness, maybe it was a personality trait, but you couldn't help but root for that character, even though they were deeply flawed in some way. So what two better ingredients to try to combine than 2 really opposite elements? So let's combine the really cute hamster with the badassness of a Bruce Lee. And we created Pim. So maybe looking at that previous slide, you wouldn't think that a little orange potato is capable of doing all these amazing martial art moves. But thanks to our really talented animator, we were able to get him to do really cool stuff and really subvert expectations based on what the character looks like. So we knew we were starting to get somewhere. It started to become a little bit more interesting. We started to invest, we started to care about the character. So really what we learned on this project, the entire secret of the art direction of the project is to combine 2 dramatically different elements, the yin and the yang, if you will. And what ends up happening is it generates interest. It becomes cool, becomes exciting. You wonder what happens next. So from that like main core concept of combining opposites, we can kind of design the rest of the game around that. The rest of the visuals anyway. So with our environment, we're going to carry over that cartoon soft rendering so we can frame the worlds like the way that we're framing the main character. But we're also going to challenge that main character by pulling him into environments that are dark or scary, ones that will make him react in unexpected and maybe courageous and adventurous ways. So we started to extrapolate from there. And of course, because it's Hamsterdam, we have to include some vices too. But we can't come out and call it a red light district. So instead of legalized prostitution, there's legalized hamster wheels that people pay time to rent or run around on. So there's still a bunch of adult material, but we've kind of disguised that as well. And so throughout the game, we sprinkle these like little tongue-in-cheek mentions for people that are paying attention. Okay, there's my slides. Thank you for waiting. So I'm going to hand it back to Howard, and Howard's going to talk about how we got to Hamsterdam.
Yeah. Yes. Hamsterdam is a parody, right? I mean, with Guns, with everything that we did, we took ourselves really seriously, and this is the first time we're like, okay, we're tired of being, really serious and arguing about, the physics of jumping, how that breaks immersion or not, and we just want to do something completely different. So Hamsterdam is a parody. On the one hand, it's making fun of people's stereotype or just these. I don't even know if they're actual stereotypes, how widespread they are, but there's some of these known stereotypes about Hamsterdam. I mean, Amsterdam is actually one of the safest cities in the world, right? I mean, but maybe it's perpetuated in Pulp Fiction or not. People have this seedy impression of Amsterdam that we want to play off of. And have you guys seen The Wire? Anybody? Yeah.
favorite show of all time.
Yes,
And I don't
it
think
is.
about other shows anymore because I watched them.
Yes, it is ours as well. And so we want to, you know, if you guys haven't seen it, A, go watch it, and B, Hamsterdam is an actual place in this TV series, right? And it's crime and drug was so prevalent and infested in Baltimore that they actually carved out a zone, right? It's for just legalized drug dealing, and that actually for a while curbed the drug traffic in Baltimore. And so we thought that, why not invoke a little bit of this in the game. So with building this game, right, we started with just gray boxing. But gray boxing a brawler for mobile is actually really hard. So we use just spheres and cubes to try to play upon movement, tuning camera, position the enemies and whatnot. But we quickly realized that just doing that for brawler can only take us so far, because really brawler is about the core combat experience. It's about hit and getting hit. It's about that core engagement with the enemy, and to do that, it's really hard to get a sense of feel, whether we actually nail the feel or whether it feels right or not, if it's just spheres bouncing off of each other. So we actually just pretty early on, maybe a lot earlier than we wanted to be, modeled a couple of enemies and a hamster. The actual hamster, as you see, doesn't really look like that, but we were actually trying to mock up something quickly, or at least as quickly as we can, realizing that these are test animations and test models and rigs that we will potentially throw away. But just that itself added to development time, or time that we didn't anticipate, because we thought that, hey, we can actually gray box for a bit and tune, but surprisingly, making a brawler, especially for mobile with touch input, it's a lot harder than we thought. So the next challenge that we face is, well, this decision of how much movement do we embody in our game. Once we decided to take away the virtual D-pad, essentially we are restricting, in a lot of ways we're restricting movement, but yet we play around with all kinds of different stuff. For a week or two, we actually had this town set up that's almost like a little open world type of thing, where you can actually just freely roam around and walk into a crowded enemy and whatnot. But really, we decided that, well, if we do that, if we continue down that path, the scope will be a lot bigger than we thought. So luckily, really early on, we tried to limit scope and not kill ourselves, because with guns, that's a lesson we didn't learn too well. So hopefully this time around, we'll try to learn that lesson. In the core combat experience, once we take away the D-pad, then a lot of things, it actually is a pretty major constraint, because our ability to target and to proactively engage an enemy is, I will say, is more minimal and it's more reduced. So then we have to focus on making this game more about reaction, and the proactivity comes more in the window opportunity that you have to decide, to make a choice about how you want to attack the enemy. So another, I guess, notion, or just a struggle about flow, is that making a game about hamster fighting, doing kung fu moves, is a lot of fun for us, right? And in the beginning, we were just like, oh my god, let's make the coolest moves possible that we can imagine. And pretty soon, once we started testing it ourselves, we're like, oh, this feels terrible. The coolest move doesn't necessarily feel great because the flow isn't really there, right? And really, I think with combat, the flow for us is reinforced by animation, is about rhythm and about cadence. Once we break that, then a lot of the frustration comes, because you don't feel like you have as much control about when and where you're exacting damage to an enemy. So that's actually a lesson learned. We waste a little bit of time learning that lesson. And so what we end up doing further on is really using kind of a combination of test animation and spheres as targets. So in this way, we could sort of plot out what we want the cadence to be for different moves or different move sets. I guess one other really hard thing that we realized is with variability. With a brawler, and especially with this type of reactive brawler, really the variability is not in level design. There's not a lot of level design. It will set dress every scene to make it look slightly different. And every chapter has a background. That is meant to represent a different section of a town. But in reality, the levels are the enemies. So really, the investment for us is in making the enemies really different in as cost-effective way as possible. So we can create a primary model and basically skin it differently to connote different degrees of difficulty or different levels of threat. And really, the game mechanic then became all about, well, how do you give variability to enemy attacks? How do you allow the players to tactically react to different attacks from different enemies in an interesting way? So yeah, I mean, that's in a way that's something that we've never done, because it's coming from Guns or coming from Creepers. A lot of gameplay is in the environment, it's in the level design, and that's how we orient combat. But in something like a brawler, it's really just about the engagement itself, how the interaction is with the enemy, and that's really the entire game. And another really interesting thing that we learned that we didn't really know about is this balance between reaction and giving people the opportunity to just mash, right? And like call it cathartic release, if you will. So we oscillate between these two extremes a lot, and we're still actually trying to find the balance, the right balance. And what we've seen in playtesting is that if we give people reactive element too soon, and that's too hardcore, too hard, people become pretty hesitant. At least for adults. If we give it to kids, they just mash anyway. But most people, when they play, they become pretty hesitant because they're trained to react right away. And so even when we give them the opportunity to say, hey, now is the time that you can just wail on an enemy, they don't. And on the other end, if we build out combos, allow you to chain for too long, allow the enemies to be stunned too often, you basically would just mash and mash a lot, right? Especially in the early part of the game. And once that happens, people get bored because it's just really repetitive action and it becomes brainless, and people get bored pretty quickly. So it's actually a pretty big challenge in pacing, just in this balance alone, and how much of a reactive element do you introduce, how early on. It actually is a pretty big challenge with pacing and with progression. Okay, so the next part is really just kind of deep dive into more of a mechanic and how we came up with it, and some of the challenges that we had. So we decided that, hey, it would be cool outside of core combat if we add another nuance, another element where that could distract the player from combat, that there's something extra that they can do that could potentially be fun. So we're like, hey, Fruit Ninja is kind of like that. So what if we have someone throw a trash can like Fruit Ninja and you just swipe it and get rid of it? So we thought that would be interesting, and we thought that was highly promising, and that turned out to be a huge fail, because with Fruit Ninja, there is no character, so when you just tap randomly on screen, that immersion is not broken because you feel like it's in first-person point of view. You're swiping, you're swiping all over the place. immersion doesn't break. But here, you have a character. If we introduce a window where you can swipe too early, then the character might have to jump halfway across the screen, and the trash can have to land somewhere and whatnot, fly off the screen and maybe potentially hit an enemy. And that became just too distracting and too immersion breaking. So if we don't do that and allow you to react at the last second and make the window shorter, so it's not immersion breaking, is highly frustrating. It's at a point where if you do that, you rage quit because we distract from combat way too much. So we gave it another go. So we decided to change the trash can bomb and introduce a dodge mechanic. I thought that's like really cool, right? Because you can like just dodge and it looks cool. But even with ourselves, we rage quitted this mechanic. And the reason why is because with dodge, everything is really geared towards this last second, really reactive. You have to react in an instant, at the very, very last instant. And most of the combat is really proactive. So that inconsistency, it's really actually hard to compute in people's brain. Just by introducing one mechanic that ended up not being consistent, the rest of the combat mechanics turned out to be way more jarring than we ever thought. We thought that with the bomb, because we end up using this as a boss mechanic as well. And you have to like dodge, disappear with dodge bomb and whatnot. We thought that, hey, we unify the projectile language, people would just intuitively understand it. But as it turned out, with the context being very different, people actually have very different reactions about the same object that's meant to do the same thing. So that's another fail. And then finally, we over the course, this is like third, fourth week, we decided that everything about what we've been doing, it was really negative. You take a risk, and if you don't succeed in taking that risk, you get punished for it. So instead, we thought that, hey, what if we turn that idea on its head, where if you take a risk, you actually get rewarded for it. The risk is obviously optional. You can see if you have mastered the situation and mastered combat, you could choose to take that risk and get rewarded. And with that, so we came up with this goodie bag idea. We essentially just, basically like these buff items would drop, and you get temporary buff or health boost or coins and whatnot out of this. We thought that, hey, let's try something like this and see what happens. And it turned out to be pretty effective because as we learned, with something more superfluous, people actually don't feel like it's as immersion breaking or immersion breaking at all, because they're just, the paradigm of just tapping on a screen to collect something from them is prevalent enough where people are pretty used to it. And it's an optional thing, and people get rewarded for it, so it turned out to be a good thing. We think, anyway. So we think that it's a success. So, yeah, just even with a mechanic, it went through, for us anyway, it's typical to like all you guys, it went through a number of iterations, and a lot of times it's kind of just shot in the dark, trying to find our way. So that kind of segues into overarching lesson. We had to learn the hard way over the course of this year, working on this project, about how to fail faster, at least a lot faster than we were failing in Guns. With Guns of Icarus, would you say that building a new airship takes almost a month, 3 weeks?
Sure.
Something like that. Yeah. Because we had to gray box it, level design it. Each airship is a level in and of itself. Balance, basically tune it, play test a bunch, and see how it fits with the entire arsenal of our ship, because the game is highly complex, and to be able to then do an art pass on it, model it, texture it, and everything. It takes a long time. So if something goes wrong in the process, it usually takes us a while to figure out what to do with it. In this game, the scope is a lot smaller, and we want it to fail a lot faster. So we can try some open world idea for a week and decide that it sucks, and then we'll just throw it away. And it's really just trying to be more self-critical and not think that, oh yeah, we know what we're doing, and not dwell on that, and be willing to throw away ideas when it sucks. Our builds, even early on, our builds are weekly. I don't know how fast you guys make builds, but we try to do it as fast as a week, just so that we can get feedback really quickly and try something really quickly, and try to do the opposite of what we were doing with Guns of Icarus, which is build every month. And I think another big lesson that we learned in this process this year is how much thinking we do before we act. Because we feel like this is, for a long time, this is a side project that we're trying to wrap up. We always feel like, oh, we are. It's in a way like almost as if we started from like scratch again. For a long time, just two of us working from scratch, and we feel like time is always of the essence, and we're also getting distracted. So we only have a sliver of time sometimes to work on the project. So we want to make sure that we think about, well, not everything, but at least we try to think as hard as we can and flesh out as many problems as we can before we actually code it and actually implement it, and put it in build. So we'll go through a spec, we'll talk about a concept, an idea, someone will spec it out, but we'll also do a lot more concepting than we used to do. So this is a boss mechanic that we're prototyping, but what you see is actually not a gameplay footage. It's actually just Derek doing a play blast of it, because he can do it really quickly. So we'll static concept, just do some sketches and write out the mechanic, and then Derek actually, based on that, Derek actually do a play blast of it before. It doesn't have to be just because now we have all the models made.